Welcome to our latest episode of Success Stories. I'm Marc Levy, and I'm here with Dom Hawes from Selby Anderson to hear about their story. How would you describe Selby Anderson to someone who doesn't know anything about your business and the services that you do?
Cool. Yep. Okay. So ostensibly, we're a group of creative and communication agencies. There are 7 or 8 different units within the group. I say 7 or 8 because we're quite entrepreneurial, so we quite often have new things bubbling under. But typically, we work with businesses in very complex or complicated markets. So they're either very heavily regulated, intermediated, or very heavily legislated. So things like financial services, technology, industry principally, and pharmaceutical. And for them, we do a range of things. Generally, our work is geared towards growth and commercial success.
So, Dom, there's lots of companies like yours. Why is Selby Anderson different?
Yeah, you're right. It's marketing services is a very mature and also a very fragmented market. So there's everything from the giants at one end, the WPPs and the publicists, the networked agencies, all the way down to 1 or 2 person companies. I think there's something like 35,000 agencies in the UK. What we're trying to do with this business, and the reason we founded it, was we're trying to do a more commercial take on what an agency looks like. So we measure ourselves by the commercial success of our clients, principally, rather than just by the efficacy, but if you like, the creativity of our output. So we're trying very much to be the agency that helps businesses we believe in win the future, and that means very, very commercial.
That's great. And what's your story? How did you get into this business? And
when I started it. So, if you can't get a job, I always say, if you can't get a job with someone else, you have to create your own. So I've on and off, I've been starting and or running businesses since about 2000.
Okay.
And this one is, in 2018, we put the business plan together for this. We funded it through 2 family offices, and then we built it over 3 years through largely mergers and acquisition. We've got some organic growth in the background, and we did also create 2 agencies along the way. So ours is largely a buy and build story. So we went looking for specific specialists and specific expertise in specific markets to build a whole offer. And where we had a gap and we couldn't buy, we grew instead.
That's great. And what would you say the highlights of that journey has been?
Well, it was really manic, right? So, it's been an extraordinary 5 years. I haven't had another 5 years like it in my career. If you think that we were funded effectively at the beginning of 19, we made 3 acquisitions by March in 2019. We kept up the pace through 2019, and then of course in March 2020, the country shut down. Yeah. So then we had a year of lockdown, and thankfully we went into it largely serving business to business marketers. A lot of the travel or any travel or entertainment stuff that we're doing just disappeared, and it hasn't come back. So we were reasonably insulated against the ravages of COVID. But then since then, of course, it hasn't been normal either. Like at the end of COVID, we all looked forward to the world opening up, and it did. But then Russia invaded Ukraine, and we had the interest rate problems, and we had inflation, and anything that knocks the confidence of UK PLC really has a big impact on marketing services businesses. We are the canary in the mine for the economy. And so it's been an extraordinary 5 years. The highlight of it actually probably is that we've come through it all reasonably well. And we're lucky that we've got very, very good shareholders. The people who backed us in the beginning have been very supportive because it's been enormously difficult trading conditions. But we got really big quite quickly. There were some complications in that I think we might talk about in a minute. But really for me, reaching the level that we got to was my kind of first target, around the 200 people, around the 20 million in revenues. And we got there in sort of 2.5 years. That was fabulous for me. It was a really exciting ride.
Yeah, and as you say, scaling up can be quite challenging. So what lessons have you learned, and what would you give, what advice would you give to any other businesses scaling up?
Okay, well, I think it depends how you scale, probably.
Yeah.
In fact, we spend a lot of time advising businesses that are scaling as well. So if you're scaling organically, like if you're a tech business, a SaaS business, I think the challenges you have are slightly different. We scale through mergers and acquisitions, and that brings with it its own peculiar issues. Every time you acquire a company, you acquire a different culture, you acquire a different set of people, all of whom have different sets of needs. You acquire a different brand. There are bank accounts. There are, different operating procedures. So scaling through mergers and acquisitions is fiendishly complicated, probably why it so often fails, I think. And we took a very light touch approach to integration. So it's like, let's get the scale first. And then, rather than mandating people work together or in a particular way, we created a very decentralized culture. It's like a very modern, if you like, flat hierarchy, sort of flat management structure, I should say. Virtually hierarchy free, where we're encouraging people to work together for the right reasons, because it creates a result for the client, rather than, because we've mandated it from, a central tower somewhere. And I think that made our life easier. But, in the same way that when you're building applications, if you don't do all your housework, you get technical debt. If you build a business through mergers and acquisitions and you don't do your integration along the way, you get, if you like, management debt.
Yeah.
And so since the downturn and since we stopped acquiring, we've been trying to sort out that management debt, and it's been painful. So for example, in the group, we have 17 entities. All of those have to be audited. All of those have to be managed. They're not all now live. Some are dormant, but the process of then consolidating those is very time consuming and requires capital. And it's not immediately value adding. So it's quite a hard thing to do when the market has turned down. So my advice to people scaling, if you're scaling through mergers and acquisitions, is do your integration along the way without interfering with culture. Just make sure you've got the basics together. If you don't need an entity, start shuttering it from the start. Yeah. I know that there are implications there if you've got goodwill on the balance sheet and all that kind of stuff, but really get ahead of it and think about it, I would suggest. The other thing I think when you're scaling with M&A is be really mindful on who your earners are and any duplicated roles. So we were really benign, for good reason, not wanting to upset any of our share purchase agreements. We were very hands-off during any earn-out period, and so we didn't get on board role duplication. Now, in a bull market, when everything's going in the right direction, that doesn't matter. You can handle a little bit of fat, but as soon as the market either plateaus or starts going backwards, you've got to be right on those. And unless you start getting on that from day one, I think you build yourself problems because people become reliant on the teams around them. So I think get ahead of the difficult bits really early on, I would suggest. Probably actually, like pre-acquisition, while you're having your conversations with your target, be very clear that a certain degree of integration is going to happen on day one. And if people aren't up for it, honestly, I'd question. Just from my experience, I'd question doing that transaction.
And you talk about the integration of lots of different businesses and different cultures. I mean, what's it like now, having brought all of these businesses together, and how do you see that developing in the future?
Well, it's we're still a group of individual agencies, and we made it very clear to the businesses that we were acquiring that we weren't going to stamp all over their culture. So we're specifically not looking for monoculture. It's very important to each of those agencies because they do different things. So for example, today we're filming this in AML Group. They are a creative and advertising agency. They have a very well-defined culture in this organization that we would not want to change or upset. They're really good at distilling very complicated messages or very, very important messages into very, very simple language. See it, say it, sorted came out of this building, for example. Not a very popular phrase with many people, but one of the most effective pieces of communication in the country. So to have that ability demands a certain type of person who doesn't like corporate bother boots stamping all over culture. So we're still very mindful of it. I think that makes, like from my point of view at group, it makes our job a little bit more difficult because we have to get comfortable that there are different cultures and different ways of doing things operating within the company. So, but what we end up having is we have a cohort of people who know, like, trust each other and can come together to do work for the benefit of a client, even though they come from completely different cultures. So it feels like, which I think was your question, actually from my point of view, it feels like a really exciting place to be because you've still got a bunch of agencies that have their own identity but can come together and work really well together when need be. And we have big multinational clients, and right now we've got campaigns live in the USA, in Asia, right across Europe, in the UK. We're a big exporter, if you like, of creative service. And I love the fact that that's coming out of small businesses that many people haven't even heard of. But we have this sort of bizarre influence across the globe. It's really cool.
So Dom, you talk about your business being both in the UK and global. Are there any shifts and challenges that you've had to navigate in the marketing industry in dealing with your growth and expansion?
Yeah, loads. I mean, it's interesting. So we've had a good conversation. We're talking about M&A because that's been my lived experience in the business. But of course, this is all the purpose of this business is to help other businesses win the future. And the way marketing gets done, in my opinion, has changed massively. So as a little segue, to chart this and to measure it, I started a podcast called The Unicorn Marketing Show about 2 years ago. And I bring academics, authors, and chief marketing officers who are non-clients into the building. So it's very important to me that I don't want it to be an echo chamber. So I bring outside people in and say, right, what's happening in the world? And that gives me an interesting perspective, I think, on how businesses, particularly enterprise, are handling the marketing challenge. And that's best illustrated by looking at employment figures in this country. So in 2011, and I'm sure I'll get these numbers wrong and someone will shoot me for it, but approximately there were 120,000 people employed in marketing services. In 2025, there are approximately 300,000 people expected, maybe 330 expected to be employed. And I was really interested in that number. So I went and looked at the difference. And the difference now is the digitization thing. So as digital tools became available to clients, they've started building capability a lot more in-house. So they're building the ability to create content and to distribute that content themselves. Now, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, the role of an in-house marketer was really different than it is now. And the typical thing in marketing is the 4 Ps, right? Product, price, place, and promotion. That's the classical view of marketing. And back in the day, in-house, they would have been responsible for those things. But that's before price comparison engines and the digitization of basically everything we do. Now, marketing is generally too big for it just to sit in the marketing department. So what you find is a lot of in-house departments become really good at that promotional piece, creating content, probably like we're creating today, high quality, well-produced content. The role of the agency, therefore, massively changes. And that's really come into focus, I think, through COVID and the post-COVID thing, if you like. I don't know what to call the time post-COVID. It's too early to name it yet. But COVID made everybody realize you don't have to have people in a room to make stuff happen, because we were all forced to work remotely. And none of us have come back to the office, well, very few of us have come back to the office full time. So that, AI, that kind of Zoom technology revolution has made many businesses realize they don't need to rely on agencies like they used to. So the high volume, the low value work, they don't want to put into agencies anymore because the economics just don't work. So for companies like ourselves, we're trying to work out where we can create real value for our clients, and not just create it, but also measure it and demonstrate that we're creating that value, because slowly more and more is being taken in-house. Nothing wrong with that, actually. I completely support the taking in-house, certainly of the high volume work. And these things, by the way, are a pendulum. So they will swing back eventually, because suddenly the CFO is going to go, hey, we've got 150 heads on our account, all doing marketing. What are they doing? And we'll outsource some of that. So that'll happen. But the key, I think, difference now is that when the pendulum swings, they're not going to outsource to UK companies. They'll probably outsource offshore, just like we do.
Yeah.
And that's why, when I'm talking about joint ventures in overseas territories, I'm talking about joint ventures with clients. So we know how to run creative studios to produce that kind of content. They know how to run, develop, do things in their business. So I'm talking now to some of our enterprise clients about, why don't you let us set your studio up for you? We'll provide the technical training. We'll provide the creative training for you. We will help you with the career path of those people from a creative point of view. And by the way, we can probably buy back excess capacity so that you make sure you're getting best bang for your buck out of your offshore facility, which is why it's a joint venture. So the market's changing enormously, and we're all feeling slightly as we go. Everyone's got a slightly different view, but at the heart of it, creativity still, I guess, is king. because if you distill our job down to its simplest form, noise is everywhere now, right? Especially with AI. Anyone can write and produce and all this kind of stuff, but good content always stands out, and creativity is at the heart of all good content. So our job in its simplest form is to create really, really eye-catching or arresting content so that it stands out and gets remembered. That basic stuff hasn't changed.
So what's next then in the Selby Anderson story? Where's your business going in the future?
Well, we're looking very closely at America at the moment, the USA. As I said, we do a lot of business in the USA. We work with a lot of American domicile businesses, and we run campaigns for American domicile businesses in the USA. So the next logical step for us is to get some boots on the ground there. And in 2025, we're looking very closely at how we go about doing that. America is littered with the corpses of businesses like ours that have tried and got it wrong. So we've got a very capable team here that's been looking at that for 12 to 18 months, and I think we have a path. We are in an interesting year next year, 2025. It's the first year where none of our agencies will be in earn-out under share purchase agreement, and I think that probably gives us the ability to start some of the administration properly that I mentioned earlier, so we can start consolidating the back end of our business. The market doesn't necessarily need to see any change, but my vision is to have a very, very simple back end, as few legal entities as possible. So it's not glamorous to the outside world, but it will make us a much more efficient business. But I'm also mindful that we have come through an extraordinary period where, and I haven't seen one like it, but normally a downturn in this industry is a steep downturn where everything goes off, but the market quickly comes back. For 2 years, it's been subdued. And that's trained us all in a slightly different way of thinking. So I'm now thinking about, can we take some of the higher volume, lower value work that we do and offshore that? So next year we'll be exploring either partnerships or establishing joint ventures in places like South America or South Africa or Portugal or other places where they have a similarly creative mindset, but the cost of production is a little bit lower. So we're not getting back into M&A mode, I wouldn't think, for a couple of years. We're still, if you like, doing housekeeping. But I think if I've learned anything across the last couple of years, and I might say the process of trying to bring those 17 entities together, it's like we have to get as nimble and simple as possible, because we don't yet know whether the next 2 years are going to be like the last 2 years or whether we're coming back into a bull run.
Well, Dom, it sounds like really exciting times, great opportunities both here and around the globe, and it sounds like there's a lot of changes coming up for the business. It's been great chatting to you, and thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Mark. I've enjoyed the conversation.